Hello, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Theoretical YouTube channel, where I watched Lightyear a couple weeks ago and I didn't think I had any theories to make.
What?
Like, from the opening text, we know the whole movie is a fictional film inside the Pixar universe, so it's not like the plot has any deeper impact on the wider world. We don't need to go through and search for Easter eggs or try and bend it so it fits inside the Pixar theory, because the movie has made it explicitly clear that Andy Davis himself is aware of it. It's his favorite movie! However, upon careful consideration and this conspiracy flowchart, I believe that the meta nature of Lightyear being a fictional film actually helps us answer one of the most mysterious and oldest Pixar questions in the entire franchise. Actually, I think it points to two major conclusions we could draw from almost 3 decades of evidence strewn across multiple films. So today we finally answer the questions: 1. How did Andy get his hands on a Buzz Lightyear doll? And who is Emma Jean? It's a hot day and I had to shut my window and turn off the fan for audio quality. You're welcome. Okay, so if you don't know who Emma Jean is, that's kind of the whole point of this video, right? But actually I'll get back to that in a minute, because the first thing we need to address is why it's weird that Andy received a Buzz Lightyear toy on his 6th birthday. If you somehow don't know the plot of Toy Story by now, the whole conflict of the movie kicks off when Andy Davis receives a Buzz Lightyear action figure for his birthday, making his previous favorite toy, Woody, a cowboy ragdoll, extremely jealous of the attention Andy gives Buzz throughout the rest of the film. Now, Andy receives Buzz from his mother as a surprise birthday gift. It was so secret it wasn't even placed out with the other presents at the party.
Wait a minute! Oh, what do we have here? Oh.
Wait! Turn that thing back on!
Come in, Mother Bird. Come in, Mother Bird. Mom has pulled a surprise present from the closet.
It was that special and unexpected. And it's pretty clear from the other kids' reactions that getting a Buzz Lightyear doll was a big deal. But in Toy Story 2, we also learned that the reason Andy and his friends are so excited isn't just because of schoolyard capital and street cred. Tour guide Barbie explains that in 1995, both the year Toy Story came out and the year Lightyear supposedly premiered, retailers grossly underestimated the demand for the new film's merchandise.
Back in 1995, short-sighted retailers did not order enough dolls to meet demand.
Which is just another parallel between Lightyear and Star Wars, since in 1977, the toy companies producing Star Wars merchandise had no idea the film would be such a success. Therefore, they underproduced products for the holiday season. Literally one of the most popular gifts that year were branded pieces of cardboard that could later be exchanged for Star Wars merchandise at a later date. Take that, Tickle Me Elmo. I showed up like cardboard. And technically the exact same thing happened just a couple years ago with the release of The Mandalorian. Because The Child was being kept secret from the general public, retailers didn't have any Baby Yoda merchandise, even though everyone was obsessed with the new character. Can you find 1 million Grogu shirts and dolls now? Absolutely. But for a few months there was an absurd demand without any products to actually purchase. And within the Pixar canon, this was also the case with Buzz Lightyear. It's incredible that Andy received this toy because very few of them even existed at that time, unlike when we visit Al's Toy Barn a few years later, where there's an entire aisle just dedicated to one action figure on every shelf. Geez, Al, overcompensating much? And from context clues in the rest of the franchise, it's clear that the Davis family is not fabulously wealthy. At best, they're probably upper middle class. In fact, one of the plot devices in the first film is that the family is downsizing their house and the toys need to get back before the move. Technically, they don't actually use the word downsizing in the film, but they do move, and the house they move into is smaller. And I don't know if you've ever moved before, but just getting everything in order is expensive enough. Not exactly the time to be shelling out exorbitant amounts of money for an action figure that will surely be cheaper and more available in just a few months. So how did Andy possibly end up with a Buzz Lightyear toy in 1995? Well, let's talk about another object that Andy really shouldn't own: the infamous postcard from Toy Story 3. A postcard that is not addressed to him and he didn't send. Instead, it's addressed to Carl and Ellie Frederickson and sent from the mysterious Emma Jean. And yes, you did hear me correctly. Pinned to Andy's bulletin board is a piece of cardstock explicitly referencing the main characters of the Pixar movie Up. And just to be perfectly clear, this is not the first time we have seen this postcard. It appeared a year earlier in the movie Up itself, when we see the exact same message pinned to Carl and Ellie's mirror during the montage, which makes everyone cry. Which really begs two questions. Why in the world does Andy have a postcard addressed to Carl and Ellie? And who the heck is Emma Jean? There has been quite a bit of internet debate around these two questions, and to be honest, I have never been fully satisfied with any proposed explanation. But I guess let's break down what we do know about Emma Jean. Clearly she knows Carl and Ellie Frederickson, at least well enough to tell them about her trip to Yellowstone National Park. She is alive during the time period between Ellie growing old and her eventual death a few years later. She took a trip to Yellowstone with at least one other person, and her name is Emma Jean. Honestly, the card probably gives us more information about Carl and Ellie since now we know their exact address. 18 matches the house number we see on the Frederickson home throughout the rest of the film. And while PD is not the abbreviation for any real US state, they do reference the initials of the film's director, Pete Docter, the current head of Pixar Animation. And Bloomington is actually Pete Docter's hometown of Bloomington, Minnesota. So I think it's safe to say that the Frederickson house is probably in Minnesota. Or at least it was until someone picked it up with thousands of balloons and flew it to South America or something.
It's like America, but south.
So if Carl and Ellie are from Minnesota and Andy has a postcard addressed to them, does that mean that the Davis family also lives in Minnesota? Probably not. And while it's never explicitly said where Andy and his toys are from, the area is often referred to as the Tri-County area. I said area twice, but I'm leaving it in. Not super helpful or specific, but what is specific are the multiple references to West Cutting Boulevard across the first 3 Toy Story films.
Hey, gas, dude! You're talking to me.
Pizza Planet. Andy!
The Pizza Planet truck driver asks for directions there. Al's Toy Barn is on the corner of West Cutting and Canal, and Andy has a West Cutting street sign in his bedroom. And West Cutting Boulevard is a real street in Richmond, California, where the original Pixar Studios was located before they relocated to Emeryville, California. Richmond is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, literally right across the bay from the actual San Francisco itself. So close that when people ask him where he's from, Andy probably just says San Francisco to make things easier. Okay, so if Up takes place in Minnesota and Toy Story is in San Francisco, why does that feel like a really important fact? Oh right, because there's another Pixar film where the main plot is about a character moving from Minnesota to San Francisco, which is also directed by Pete Docter and my personal favorite Pixar film, Inside Out. I would hang this back up on my wall, but the tape keeps falling off. So I need to get some wall hangers. Okay, and you wanna know something really weird? There's not really a lot of connections between Andy Davis and the Frederickson family, which is why it's so peculiar that he has this postcard. But there's a ton of evidence that Riley and the Anderson family are related to the Fredericksons, or at least to Ellie. For one thing, there's literally a photo of Ellie in Riley's family home back in Minnesota. And throughout the film, we see multiple memory orbs referencing the beginning of Up. There's one of the Frederickson home, one of Carl and Ellie's tie, and one of their wedding. Why does Riley have a memory of a wedding in the 1940s? I bet you just saw a photo or a home video or something at some point. I doubt the Pixar theory has room for 2 time-traveling little girls. The real question here is why Riley's memory of the house is a fear orb? Like, this is the least threatening house ever. Though to be fair, she does have 2 different memories of the wedding, and one is happy and one is fearful. And she also has a memory of Carl and Ellie old together, but that's a disgust memory? So like, what's the deal, Riley? Why do you have such an issue with the Fredericksons, who are like, also probably your distant relatives? I get why her memory of the funeral is a fear orb, but like the tie? Why is the tie so scary? Is it because Carl was a balloon man and that just fed into her innate fear of clowns? Also, wait, Riley has a memory of Ellie's funeral? Oh, that actually makes so much sense. For one thing, remember that this scene in Inside Out is taking place in long-term memory. And if Riley is 11 during the events of Inside Out, which probably takes place in real time around 2015, and Ellie's funeral would have been just a few years before the events of Up in 2009-ish, then Riley would have only been like 3 years old at the time. And I don't know if you know this about the concept of death, but it's kind of scary for a young child, especially if this was her first exposure to what happens after you die. So the Andersons took their young daughter to a funeral for an older relative, and she was probably shown images of Ellie's life. You know, how real families show photos to celebrate someone's life after they pass away. Therefore, Riley starts to associate these seemingly happy images with the macabre understanding that this person is actually dead. But there was also joy in the celebration of life and the family coming together. And if you think all of this actually falls apart because Carl was alone at Ellie's funeral in the church, well, did you really think that was the point of the scene? Like, less than 5 minutes ago, Ellie was shown to have an exceptionally large and energetic family who would have absolutely gathered together to celebrate her life. At the very least, you'd think the mysterious Emma Jean would have made an appearance. Obviously, more people attended. Carl was just the last to leave because he wasn't emotionally ready to leave his wife behind. There was plenty of opportunity for the Andersons and Riley to have been there. But okay, we're actually getting off track here. The point is that Riley is probably related to Ellie and definitely moved from Minnesota to San Francisco. But Carl and Ellie couldn't have children, so how exactly are they related? Well, looking back at that large, loud, and lively family, we see that Ellie likely has 2 sisters. I mean, these are obviously supposed to be her parents, and then there's 3 young people in between them, and I certainly hope these 2 aren't supposed to be siblings. I don't know, they could be just overly affectionate, but I just have a feeling they're dating. But my point is that one of these guys is probably Riley's grandmother, which would make Ellie her great aunt.
What are you doing?
But I am far from the first person to point out this possible family connection. But as far as I know, I am the first person to suggest this single church pew contains the beginnings of the Pixar royal family. Royal! Not literally, but metaphorically royal. An important family. Okay, technically I haven't fact-checked to see if I'm the first person to say this, so let me know if this is actually just a common theory that I just don't know about. But I believe that Ellie has 2 sisters, and one of them is actually Emma Jean. Specifically this one, who I really hope is not dating her brother. But technically, everything, aka what little we know about Emma Jean, fits nicely into this sister's profile. She knows both Carl and Ellie, is alive, and is in a relationship with someone who looks like they might want to visit Yellowstone in 50 years or so. Is that a pretty broad description? Sure, but I dare you to find a character that fits just as well and knows Ellie on a more personal basis. But then where do all the connections to Inside Out fit in? I am glad you asked, because I don't just think that one of these sisters grew up to be Riley's grandmother. I also believe that the other sister grew up to be Andy's grandmother, which is why I'm referring to this as Pixar's royal family, in case that wasn't clear already. Basically, I'm proposing that Emma Jean is either Riley or Andy's grandmother, and I'm leaning towards Andy for 2 specific reasons. One, after Ellie's death, the postcard is in Andy's possession, and it would be less weird for him to have something written by his grandma than just between 2 of his great aunts. And 2, the ages match up a little better. If Andy is turning 6 in 1995 and Riley is 11 in 2015, then Andy is 15 years older than Riley. And between these 2 sisters, the older one who is already in a relationship is more likely to have an older grandchild. But to be even more precise, the beginning of Up takes place in 1934. It says so on the ambulance that takes Carl to the hospital after he breaks his arm. So if he and Ellie were around ages 6 to 10 when they first met, then by the end of the film, Carl would be in his early 80s and Ellie would have died in her late 70s, which seems to track pretty well with how they age. And if they were married around their early 20s, then the person I'm calling Emma Jean looks like she's only a few years younger than Ellie, maybe 15 to 17, which would mean that she's also in her mid-70s during the events of Up, and the younger sister would be a good decade younger than Ellie. So for the sake of clarity, let's try to set everyone's age at one specific point on the timeline. How about around the time of both the postcard being written and the death/funeral of Ellie Frederickson, which would be in 2007-ish. Carl and Ellie would be 79, Emma Jean would be 75, the younger sister would be 69, Riley would be 3, and Andy would be 18. Wait a second, except for the 2 sisters, we have literally spent time with each of these characters around this exact exact time period. In fact, this timeline would place certain scenes from Inside Out, the beginning of Up, and all of Toy Story 3 within a span of just a few possible months. Not to mention all of the Minnesota and San Francisco references across the different properties. Of course, all of this is assuming that Carl waits about 2 years after Ellie's death to start traveling to Paradise Falls, but I don't think that this is a stretch at all. It seems pretty clear to me that these three movies are all telling one massive story of an extended family who started in Minnesota and then for a variety of reasons moved to the Bay Area. Okay, here's where I'm gonna throw a weird wrench into everything because there's a chance that Up doesn't take place in Minnesota. There's actually a few other Easter eggs apart from the postcard that point to certain scenes taking place in a completely different city. But you know what that city is? You guessed it! San Francisco! Again! Okay, but the biggest indicator here is actually the ice cream shop that Carl takes Russell to at the end of the film. Because Fenton's Creamery is a real ice cream shop located in Oakland, California, which in case you didn't know, is extremely close to San Francisco. There's actually a few other tiny nods to locations in Oakland or the general Bay Area, but they pretty much all take place at the very end of the film or in the photo montage credits. And since Carl and Ellie never moved away from their hometown, this would suggest that all of the non-South America parts of Up actually take place in California. Well, not necessarily, because the whole reason they're eating at this ice cream shop is because it's where Russell's dad used to take him. So it's clear that Russell has spent some time in Oakland, but Russell doesn't live with his father. In fact, the only communication Russell has with his dad is over the phone because he's away a lot.
Well, he's away a lot. I don't see him much.
He's got to be home sometime.
Well, I called, but Phyllis told me I bug him too much.
Away across the country in San Francisco, whereas Russell's mom has relocated to Minnesota, where the Fredericksons are really from. We don't learn anything else about Russell's relationship to his father other than that it's relatively distant, and his stepmom's name is Phyllis.
Phyllis.
Like Phyllis Smith, who played Silas in Inside Out, but also played a character named Phyllis on The Office. But Inside Out takes place between San Francisco and Minnesota, and oh yeah, I'm overanalyzing. Anyway, my point is that Fenton's doesn't have to be in the same town Carl grew up in. We just know they visit there at the end of the film. But we also see that they took the giant blimp to get there. And look, if you're already taking a dirigible from South America, what's a few thousand more miles? Especially when there's Butterbrickle at the end of the Rocky Road. And without a home or any remaining roots in the original town, assuming that Russell took his mom on the blimp trip, there's nothing stopping Carl from just straight up moving to Oakland. After all, we've already established that he has family there. I am referring to the Davises in Richmond, by the way, because the Andersons won't make the same cross-country move for another 8 years. Maybe they would have done it sooner if they could have borrowed the family blimp. Wait a minute. 3 families, 3 cities, but all located within about a 45-minute drive of each other. But San Francisco is in San Francisco County, Oakland is in Alameda County, and Richmond is in Contra Costa County. 3 counties, or maybe tri-counties. After all, the banners at Riley's hockey game also reference the tri-counties. So, I think we found Pixar's tri-county area. But what does any of this have to do with Emma Jean? And how did Andy get his hands on the postcard? Well, looking at our timeline again, Andy would have come into possession of the postcard after Carl and Ellie had already received it, since we first see it pop up around 2007-ish, shortly before Ellie's funeral. So then my thought is that after Ellie's death, the postcard was returned to Emma Jean at the funeral, since it doesn't appear in any of the photo albums or other records that Carl is shown to keep of his wife later on in the film. Not exactly solid evidence, but it does seem weird that it wouldn't be kept in the same place if he still had it. Okay, so then what if Andy was also at his great aunt Ellie's funeral and was given the postcard there by his grandmother Emma Jean? And that's how we track the chain of custody. Plus that matches up with our timeline too, because we don't actually see the postcard in his room until after his high school graduation, which would also be just a few months after Ellie's funeral. Which really just leaves the question, why would Emma Jean give Andy the postcard in the first place? Okay, so now here's where we actually do get a big stretch, but just hear me out, okay? What if Andy wanted that postcard because it had his grandmother's signature on it? Not for any tragic reason or anything. Presumably she's still alive at this point. What if Emma Jean is actually famous within the Pixar universe itself? What if she's a famous Hollywood actress? And what if she was in Andy's favorite movie, Lightyear? Because if you can recall way back to the beginning of this video, Lightyear is a film within a film. And while it appears animated to us, the characters in Toy Story would just be watching a live-action space adventure filled with real human actors, except for the cat.
That was utterly terrifying, and I regret having joined you.
One of which is an older woman. Now in 1995, Andy is 6, Carl and Ellie would be in their late 60s, and Emma Jean would be in her early to mid 60s, which is exactly the same age range as the actress playing Darby in Lightyear. Not to mention that they do have a few similar features, albeit Darby's actress is much older. They both have very round noses, and while the sister's is much smaller, Darby's nose is very close to both of her older parents. So she likely grew into that facial feature over time. We also see that Emma Jean's jawline is much more square than either Ellie or their younger sisters, very similar to Darby's. And yes, Emma Jean does appear to have dark eyes, whereas Darby's are actually a dark grayish blue. But I'd also like to point out that this character doesn't appear to have irises at all, or maybe she's just too far away to tell. My point is that Emma Jean could very well have dark gray eyes that appear even brownish from a distance. Which is also the case with Darby. Close-ups, not brown. Far away, kind of brown. And sure, this girl appears to be a little taller than Darby, but she's also sitting down and much younger. Plus, I'd also like to point out the fact that Ellie is barely taller than Carl, even though proportionally she looks like she should tower over him. So it's pretty likely that Emma Jean is closer to her sister's height and just has short legs too. Like me! And this isn't as strong of a point here, but both Emma Jean and Darby are shown to be wearing their hair pulled back and tied low at the nape. Of course, hairstyle is likely to change over time, especially if you're cast in a blockbuster movie, but I just thought I would point that out. And this theory also aligns with why each branch of the family has a staggered move to California. Riley's dad moves the family to California because he's involved in a tech startup. Carl is following Russell, who's probably from the Bay Area himself. But why did the Davises leave Minnesota? It could be for mundane reasons, but I like to think that Emma Jean moved her family there so she could pursue a career in acting, which would eventually lead to her appearance as Darby in the film Lightyear in 1995, which could actually explain why Andy ended up with such a rare toy in the first place. Because if anyone is likely to get their hands on an underproduced action figure from that year's hit action movie, it's probably one of the movie's stars. So, Andy received a Buzz Lightyear from his mother, sure, but he got it from his grandmother, Emma Jean, action movie star and sister to Ellie Frederickson. Boom! Okay, now do you want some additional crackpot explanation that totally jumps the shark here? Because if Andy is 15 years older than Riley, then he would be around 26 during the events of Inside Out. And because the address on his college acceptance letter is from Emeryville, California, the current location of Pixar Studios, we know that he stuck around in the Bay Area for school. Now, we don't exactly know what he went to school for, but he does have a PU pennant hanging in his room, which is likely a reference to Pixar University, a real-life training program for employees working for Pixar. Do I think Andy works for Pixar? No, I don't. He probably went to a normal school, but maybe he has interest in the technical aspects of filmmaking they teach at PU. Right, I said this was a stretch, but what if Andy Davis is the other founder of Brang, which is the company Bill Anderson moved his family to San Francisco to help get off the ground? Andy's the right age, just getting out of school, and not only in the right location country-wise, but in the state of California itself. If he studied technology or business at school, Andy would be the perfect demographic for starting a tech startup in 2015. So what if he called one of his relatives to help out, someone else who knows the industry a little more? Maybe he met him at Ellie's funeral 8 years earlier. And that would mean that Brang actually started as a semi-family business, which we know is somewhat successful because we see an advertisement for it on the New York subway during the events of Soul. So, just saying, keep an eye out for Brang in upcoming Pixar movies because big tech companies and AI don't typically have a great track record in the universe. And I'd hate to see Andy get wrapped up in that. That's pretty much what I have for you today. Not the most airtight theory, but I am 95% convinced we are on the right track. If you liked this video, please feel free to tell me in the comment section below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you have, create another account and subscribe again. I don't know, maybe just watch another video. You can also follow us on Twitter at Theory_Central, the only Twitter feed that's actually a film within a film. Don't ask me how that's possible. And consider supporting us on Patreon, like the incredible David W. and Alex Toquinto, who are also members of Ellie's family. It's all connected! So thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.